The demographic transition theory observes the historic shift from societies with high birth rates and high death rates, typically due to low levels of technology, education, and economic development, to societies with low birth and death rates, often attributed to advancements in these areas. This transition, integral to economic development worldwide, allows economies to funnel the benefits of technological improvement and factor accumulation into raising per capita income. 3 key changes drive this process: less dilution of capital and land stock, inclusion of human capital, and a larger workforce relative to overall population, which results in a change in age distribution within the population. Though this transition has been observed in many industrialized nations, its application can vary significantly across individual countries due to social, political, and economic factors. The theory is widely accepted in the social sciences due to the consistent correlation of declining fertility with social and economic development. However, scholars continue to debate whether industrialization and higher incomes cause reduced populations or vice versa. They also probe the involved roles of factors like increased income per capita, decrease in mortality, movement towards old age security, and rising demand for human capital. The demographic transition theory is rooted in demographic history, developed by American demographer Warren Thompson in 1929 and echoed by Frenchman Adolphe Landry around 1934. Over the years, this theory has been refined and elaborated upon by various demographers, including Frank W. Notstein, Oded U. Notstein, Oded Galore, and unified growth theory scientists. By 2009, the widely accepted societal understanding was a negative correlation between fertility and industrial development, with some of the first evidence of a demographic transition seen in 18th century Jewish populations in Bohemia and Moravia. In the initial stage of pre-industrial societies, high birth and death rates tend to balance each other out, leading to minimal population growth. Such demographics prevailed until the late 18th century before ending in Western Europe. This slow growth during this era was tied to the constraints imposed by the available food supply, causing any birth surplus to be negated by equivalent death rates, unless the society developed new technologies to amplify their food production capacity. In the second phase, corresponding to the developing nations, significant drops in death rates are witnessed due to advancements in food supply and sanitation. These enhancements increase life expectancy and minimize disease prevalence. They encompass developments in farming techniques, such as selective breeding and crop rotation. The focus on public health and improved sanitation notably lowers mortality rates, particularly among children. Notably, female literacy and public health education programs significantly contributed to the health advancements in the late 19th and early 20th centuries in Europe. The fall in mortality rate began in the late 18th century in the Northwest and gradually expanded southeast over the next century. The absence of a corresponding fall in birth rates during this stage results in a significant population boom. The third stage involves declining birth rates due to various factors including accessibility to contraception, increasing wages, urbanization, fewer subsistence farming, education, and improved status of women. A lesser emphasis on children's labor value, increased parental investment in children's education, and other societal transformations. In this stage, population growth envisages a steady trend. The decline in the birth rate of developed countries began in the late 19th century in Northern Europe, despite limited contraceptive availability. In the fourth and final stage, both birth and death rates are low. Birth rates can even fall below the replacement level, leading to population reduction, a phenomenon observed in countries like Germany, Italy, and Japan. This stage poses a threat to industries dependent on population growth, as the aging population of the baby boomers leads to an economic burden on the diminishing working population. As lifestyle diseases rise due to unhealthier lifestyles and aging populations, death rates could increase slightly towards the late 20th century. Birth and death rates in developed nations stabilized at lower levels. In an era prior to the Industrial Revolution, both birth and death rates oscillated swiftly in response to natural phenomena like droughts and disease, generating a relatively stable and youthful populace. The absence of effective family planning and contraception meant that birth rates were essentially dictated by women's capacity to give birth. Though immigration lowered death rates under certain circumstances, such as 19th century Europe and Eastern US, death rates usually mirrored birth rates, frequently exceeding 40 per 1,000 annually. Children played a significant economic role within the family from a tender age, assisting with tasks ranging from fetching water and firewood to caring for younger siblings, cooking, and working in the field. The cost of raising a child was minimal, no more than their meals, as there were no education or entertainment expenses in essence. The total cost of rearing children was nearly equal to the child's contribution to the household. Additionally, as they matured into adults, they acted as a considerable input into the primary family business, typically farming, and served as the crucial security in old age. Particularly in India, having an adult son was a widow's sole guard against destitution as long as death rates remained elevated. There was a compulsory need for children. The society followed the Malthusian principle during this period, with the population being largely determined by the food supply. Any fluctuations in food availability directly caused population changes. Recurring famines often led to considerable mortality overall. The population dynamics resembled that of the wild animal kingdom during this phase. This was the initial phase of global demographic transition, dominated by rudimentary activities such as small-scale fishing, farming, pastoralism, and petty businesses. The next stage of the demographic transition featured a drop in death rates and a consequent surge in population. Initiated by the agricultural revolution in the 18th century, this shift happened progressively in Europe, but occurred much faster in developing nations during the 20th century. Countries such as Yemen, Afghanistan, and much of sub-Saharan Africa are in this phase, barring South Africa, Zimbabwe, Botswana, Eswatini, Lesotho, Namibia, Kenya, Gabon, and Ghana, which are transitioning into Stage 3. The decrease in mortality rate can be traced back to the following key improvements. Advances in agricultural practices and transportation led to an abundance of food supply, subsequently lowering deaths due to starvation and dehydration. Technological progress in agriculture included crop rotation, selective breeding, and seed drill technology. The latter half of the 20th century saw developing nations transition into a demographic phase that's marked by rapid population growth, a major concern for demographers today. This phase, referred to as Stage 2 in the Demographic Transition Model, DTM, is characterized by profound changes in population, age structure, and enhanced vulnerability of nations to becoming failed states if progressive governance is lacking. In this stage, the decline of death rates, specifically within the initial 5-10 years of life, leads to increased child survival and, consequently, a younger population. As more children survive and go on to form their own families, they often maintain the high fertility rates of their parents. This results, consequently, in a widening age pyramid base, indicative of a bloated youthful population, and thus amplified population growth. Transiting to Stage 3 in the DTM marks a shift in population dynamics, with low death rates balanced out by a decrease in birth rates. This decline is triggered by an amalgam of factors: improved economic standing, elevation in the status and education of women, and access to contraception. However, the rate and duration of birth rate decrease vary across nations. Several theories speculate on the key contributor to declining fertility in this stage. In rural areas, a continued dip in child mortality leads to fewer offspring as parents grow confident in their children's survival and supporting them in their old age. The rising wave of urbanization renders traditional fertility values and the rural significance of children obsolete, while simultaneously increasing the financial burden of raising children. Recent hypotheses suggest that urban living also suppresses fertility rates by disturbing optimal mating patterns. A study in Iceland in 2008 discovered that distant cousin marriages were the most prolific, suggesting that genetic anomalies resulting from further out breeding prove a stumbling block to reproduction. The shifting roles of women in the workforce, issues with male involvement in child rearing, and advancements in contraception are significant factors contributing to decreasing fertility rates. This is evident in regions such as Southern Europe and Japan, where traditional gender roles still hold sway. As societal norms and values evolve regarding gender and parenting, birth rates are impacted as much by these cultural changes as they are by the accessibility and understanding of contraceptive methods. Decreasing fertility rates result in significant shifts in population structure. As youth dependency wanes and old age dependency arises, society becomes more balanced, visually represented as an elongated balloon rather than a typical pyramid-like distribution. This demographic change can lead to economic growth through what's known as the demographic dividend, an increase in the ratio of the working-age population to the dependent population. However, the transition to this balance won't occur smoothly. Factors like cultural shifts and technological improvements need to be present for birth rates to drop to desired levels in time, enabling societies to move towards the third stage. Without these factors, societies may fall prey to a demographic trap, where birth rates remain high. Numerous countries have experienced significant fertility declines, some of over 50 from pre-transition levels, including Costa Rica, Jamaica, Ecuador, Colombia, Philippines, Indonesia, Turkey, Sri Lanka, South Africa, India, Malaysia, amongst others. Some countries have seen a decline of 25-50, such as Guatemala, Tajikistan, Egypt, and Zimbabwe, while countries like Sudan, Niger, and Afghanistan have experienced a less than 25 for fertility decline. At the other end of the spectrum, where both birth and death rates are low, societies are stabilizing their total population. This occurs due to improved healthcare reducing disease rates, increased food production, and a decline in birth rates as contraception becomes widely accessible and women gain independence and work opportunities. This scenario, according to the Demographic Transition Model, DTM, was experienced in 2015 by countries such as Argentina, Bangladesh, El Salvador, Malaysia, Nepal, Tunisia, and Venezuela, among others. The DTM can suggest potential future population levels but not predict them accurately. There are proposals for additional stages beyond the established four, representing both more and less fertility-oriented futures. The study revolves around the changing dynamics of birth rates in relation to the level of development in different countries, as gauged by the Human Development Index. The earlier belief of a negative relationship between birth rates and high development levels has been disproved. Fertility rates were edging towards 2 children per woman in the early 2000s in many highly developed countries. However, a significant dip was noted in fertility rates between 2010 and 2018 in these advanced nations. Even those boasting high gender equality, the prevalent global data now contradicts any suggestion of a rise in fertility rates correlating to increasingly developed nations. Evolutionary biology would lead one to expect wealthier individuals producing more offspring, given their access to abundant resources. However, the current trend seems to deviate from this predictable pattern. Birth rates are anticipated to steady at a low point indefinitely, according to numerous models. Some scholars argue against this prevalent viewpoint, suggesting modern environmental pressures could lead to increased fertility rates driven by individual or cultural natural selection. Significant variance is observed in birth rates among different cultures. For instance, some religious cultures exhibit high birth rates that cannot be explained by income disparities. Academicians like Jane Falkingham from Southampton University noted that population prognosis over the past 50 years has consistently been inaccurate because improvements in mortality rates have been underestimated and fertility trends have been inaccurately predicted. The UN Office published a speculative global population range for the year 2300, from a low of 2.3 billion, declining at 0.32s per year, to a high of 36.4 billion, with a 0.54 billion with a 0.54 annual increase rate. Also considered was an implausible constant fertility scenario of 134 trillion, based on maintaining the fertility rates observed between 1995-2000 perpetually. A shift in the age structure may be caused by a decrease in mortality and birth rates during the demographic transition. With a decrease in infant mortality and an increase in child survival, there may be a rise in the populations of older children, adolescents, and young adults over time. This suggests a rise in the fertile population proportion that, combined with constant fertility rates, may lead to an increase in the number of children, further driving up the child population. Between 1750 and 1975, England underwent a significant demographic shift characterized by decreasing rates of mortality and fertility. Most notably, the death rate from infectious diseases plummeted from 11 per thousand to less than 1 per thousand, while the death rate from other causes remained steady at approximately 12 per 1,000. Since 1850, notably, these drastic changes in demographic trends are not attributed to technology, advancements, or medical developments. During the 1980s and early 1990s, Ireland's population dynamics aligned more closely with typical European patterns. A historical anomaly, Ireland's mortality exceeded the European community average in 1991, while the fertility rate dropped to the replacement level. These drastic shifts reflect deeper societal changes in Ireland, including cultural shifts in family planning, the role of women in the workforce, the declining influence of the Catholic Church, and the extent of immigration. France, on the other hand, deviates markedly from the standard Western demographic trajectory, reflecting its unique cultural history, demographic experience, and internal regional dynamics. Uniquely, France's population did not boom in the 19th century as both mortality and birth rates declined simultaneously. Even so, France's population profile aligns closely with other developed nations, but it has managed to avoid the population declines commonly seen in Western countries as of 2006, with a population of 62.9 million. It was the EU's second most populous country and demonstrated a growth rate of 24. Between 2000 and 2005, outperforming the European average. Natural increase accounted for over 2/3 of this growth due to high fertility and birth rates. Despite this, France's migratory balance remains relatively low, setting it apart at the European level. Pro-family policies and a higher prevalence of unmarried households and out-of-wedlock births have played a role in these singularities. These overall trends also ring true in regional demographics, with population shifts being responsible for most growth differences. Since 1982, most striking has been the stagnation of less populated and industrial northeastern regions, contrasted with strong growth in the southwest, along the Atlantic coast, and in metropolitan areas. McNichols, 2006, analysis sheds light on the transformative health and fertility shifts in East and Southeast Asia between the 1960s and 1990s. In 7 nations, Taiwan, South Korea, Thailand, Malaysia, Indonesia, China, and Vietnam, the demography dramatically changed due to their socioeconomic evolution. Aided in some cases by forceful government intervention, a sound local administrative structure often provided the promotional framework for crucial services like healthcare, education, and family planning. Economic liberalization further influenced these demographic patterns by altering the cost and quality of these services. Gholi and Iraqi Assamese, 2013, study marked India's demographical shift as a sustainable one, kick-started in the mid-1960s, followed by a fertility transition post-1965. By 2013, with a population of 1.23 billion, the country was in the 3rd stage of demographic transition, albeit 40 years behind the US and Japan. Yet, this state of demographic transition alongside its vast population holds the promise of a considerable demographic dividend in the upcoming years. Che's 2007 Korean investigation, spanning 1916 to 1938, highlights the intricate relationship between the Industrial Revolution demographical changes and human capital accumulation. The rise in income and public health expenditure triggered a decrease in mortality, which subsequently affected fertility rates and education levels. Industrialization, combined with gender wage parity, spurred preference for child quality over quantity. On a negative note, the agricultural depression of the interwar years boosted fertility and hindered mass schooling by increasing income inequality. China's demography saw a unique phase from 1959 to 1961, characterized by high mortality and low fertility attributed to the Great Famine. However, the following years witnessed an increase in birth rates and a decrease in mortality rates due to enhanced economic condition. This pattern changed again in the 1970s with a steep decline in birth rates following the government imposed later longer, fewer policy and the one-child policy. This affected China's demographic transition significantly. As the demographic dividend began to fade, China revised its family planning policies, easing the one-child rule in 2011 and completely dissolving the two-child policy by 2015. Though this led to a temporary increase in fertility trends until 2018, they began to decline again while mortality rates remained stable over the last 30 years. The theme here is the fluctuation in population growth due to forced labor policies, modernization, and changes in fertility rates in different parts of the world during the 18th to 20th century. From 1820, enforced labor practices by Madagascar's government played a negative role in population growth, contributing to rising rates of infertility and infant mortality. This demographic crisis was not purely a result of colonialism, as often argued, but largely due to the labor policies of the indigenous Marina regime. On the other hand, Russia experienced a quadrupling of its population in the 19th century due to a decline in death rates. However, Tumultuous events such as war and famine in the 20th century caused momentous shifts in fertility rates. In the 1980s and 1990s, Russia faced a unique demographic transition dubbed the demographic catastrophe, where the number of deaths exceeded the number of births, and life expectancy drastically dwindled. Meanwhile, in the United States, demographic changes didn't follow the traditional model of falling mortality rates followed by reduced fertility. Technological advances and increased real wages escalated the cost of child rearing, which led to a considerable decrease in birth rates. Rural labor demand lessened due to increased agricultural productivity, further reducing the need for labor traditionally provided by children in farming families. Thus, U.S. demographic shifts during the last 2 centuries were largely influenced by economic and technological advancement. During the 17th and 18th centuries, mortality rates in colonial North America remained low, particularly due to the generous space available. This ample room tempered factors such as the spread of diseases, low wages, and limited calories per capita, which otherwise may have led to higher mortality rates consequently. With a low death rate but high birth rate, the U.S. experienced significant population growth, jumping from less than 4 million residents in 1790 to 76 million in 1900. However, this pattern contrasted starkly with the situation in the American South, where high rates of diseases such as malaria kept the mortality quite high, especially in areas like North Carolina and New Orleans. Today, the U.S. displays low fertility and mortality rates. Birth rates stand at 14 per 1,000 per year and death rates at 8 per 1,000 per year. Nonetheless, caution should be exercised when employing the demographic transition model, DTM, for predictions, as it doesn't consider elements such as migration and specific recent phenomena such as AIDS. Additionally, the DTM's assumptions about the disconnection between birth and death rates and the role of industrialization and wealth and population changes have also been disputed, given the varying historical response to high mortality events like the Black Death. Importantly, the model doesn't fully address the effect of social changes such as female education on birth rates as such. More work has been initiated in recent years to delve deeper into the social mechanisms influencing demographic changes. The policies of 1970 and 1979, known as later, longer, fewer, and the one-child policy respectively, advocated for decreased childbirth rates in individuals of older ages. This led to a significant shift in the demographic pattern of China, also known as the fertility transition, which played a significant role in stimulating the country's economic growth. This change is a parallel to the second demographic transition, SDU, a theory introduced in 1986 by Ron Lestaheish and Dirk van de Kaya. This principle primarily centers on the changes in sexual and reproductive behavior witnessed in North America and Western Europe during the period from roughly 1963, when contraception started to become accessible to the masses, up until today. Such shifts, reinforced by the sexual revolution and the amplified presence of women in society and the workforce, provoked noteworthy demographic changes in industrialized countries, leading to a fertility level lower than replacement level. This shift is reflected in the growing number of women opting out of marriage, or not having children, living together without being married, or becoming single mothers. Along with increased participation of women in higher education and professional careers, these changes signify the rise of individualism and self-autonomy, particularly amongst women, with motivations veering away from traditional economic ones into self-realization. Nicholas Eberstadt, a political economist at the American Enterprise Institute, furthered that this transition era replaced long and stable marriages with more transitory relationships featuring divorces, separations, and series of cohabitations which are increasingly considered the norm. Philip Morgan suggests that the future of SDD is best addressed not by following a linear path, but by examining postmodern values as a single out of numerous sources that catalyze change. For him, the evolution of SDD should not be perceived as a progression toward an endpoint, but instead it should be seen as a continuous process of changes.